Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me, and welcome to 5 albums every rock fan should own. This one we found to be harder than it actually sounds like it's going to be because obviously there's so much great stuff out there, and there's a lot of different ways that we could approach this. We're going to spend some time talking about that, then we'll actually get into it. But first, I want to talk or introduce my co-host here. So Phil Aston from Now Spinning Magazine. How you doing today?
All right, thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Grant Arthur from Rock Warehouse. How are you?
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Loving the Pablo Cruz jacket. The last time you had your Peaches shirt, so every time you're wearing something that
Come
catches
on
my
now. Come on. Come on.
eye. And Pete Pardo from Sgt Tranquility. How are you doing today?
Good, Brendan. Thanks for having me. Always
Yeah,
good.
you just came in from a concert last night, Spyro
Yep.
Gyro.
Took mom to see Spyro Gyra and Lee Ritenour here locally in the Hudson Valley, and that was a
Wow.
great time. Mom had a great time. That's the important thing. So
That is,
it
is
was, it
so
was a lot of
important.
fun. A lot of fun.
Very cool. Always rocking out. All right, so we are here to try to answer the question, what 5 albums should every rock fan have? And I wanted to start off by talking about how it is that we chose that. What about an album makes it one of those ones that every rock fan should have? And I'm just going to throw out a couple things that, for me at least, I've you know took to heart on this, and one of them just being something that's classic, something that you hear about all the time. It's those albums that are always talked about, whether they're overplayed or not. For some of us that have huge music collections, have listened for a very long time, I sort of approach this as new rock fans, new people getting into this, starting music collections. What are those 5 albums, right? So the albums that I might be suggesting wouldn't be worn out for them, but they're still
Yeah.
classic, great albums. So that was something that I was looking at. And then I noticed for me that a lot of the way that I approached this was similar in nature to our last video, the perfect 10 albums. So I thought about it in needing to be, solid from start to finish, great sequencing, great production, just like all those key things, where these albums could very well easily be considered perfect 10 albums as well. In fact, on our last video, a lot of people suggested ones that I'm going to be talking about, maybe some of the ones you guys are going to be talking about. But let's go around the room and see how you guys weighed in on this and pick the one. So, Phil, what were you thinking?
Well, when we did the last video, I remember one of the comments somebody said, "Why do blokes of a certain age always seem to select albums from a certain period?" And I think that I felt like that has been part of this as well. I remember in the UK we have a program called Desert Island Discs where they have musicians on and they pick their favorite 5 albums. And I remember listening to one. It was Lemmy from Motorhead, and I got all excited thinking he was going to talk about Purple and everything else, and he didn't. He talked about Buddy Holly and rock and roll from the 50s. And he said that you can't escape your formative years, the years when you're a young teenager and music is everything. You don't have to worry about going out shopping or going for a job. It's just music. And I think that so I think this is a key part. So some music becomes like something you play over and over and over again, not like an album now where you might buy it and then you play it once a week or you put it in the car on the way to work. Back then, music has a different, it's just envelops you. So I think so some of my selections are going to be from that period. But I think with this exercise, you've also got to think of the music and the historical point of when it arrived and the impact it had on the musicians that came from the following decades, really.
Yeah, certainly. I completely agree with that aspect of it. And, to that comment that that particular person made about why do we always seem to choose albums from those, late 60s, 70s, 80s eras kind of thing, those albums now being 40, 50, some even 60,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
getting close to the 60-year mark on it. Um, I mean, the short answer is because they are that good, because they are classic albums. They're not just being reiterated because somebody has said it before, but because of, and what you touched on there, the ramifications, the impact that they've had on fans, on other musicians. I mean, that's a big key one there. Grant, let's have you weigh in on this because I know you were talking about this before we got live on air here.
Yeah, I think when I was going through this, I'm looking at these records. Now, if you look at the music industry, a lot of this things really started to hop in the 60s. That's where everything started. I'm trying to look at records that have cultural impact, that were very influential to other musicians. Like maybe you had a record that was produced that influenced another musician that you might never have this album if this other album had never been produced.
Mhm.
Because let's be honest, there's everything now is just a rehash of what's already been. The only thing that I really can think that's been new is when hip hop came in 1979, and everything else is just a rehash of what already has been. Now, you could argue with that. Maybe there's something new that I'm not aware of, but
Maybe
the albums
industrial.
that I'm going to list, we wouldn't have anything today. Maybe that's bad,
Mhm.
but these albums were very influential and they influenced a lot of people. If you're a young guitar player, some of these records might really hit a note because you have to have these records. Some of these artists changed the world,
Oh yeah,
you know?
absolutely, definitely.
So that's kind of how I looked at it. And if you're building a collection, you have to have these records. You cannot have a solid foundation without them. Now, Phil, you mentioned the whole Buddy Holly thing. I was thinking you really do have to have a Buddy Holly album in there because he was singer. He wrote his own songs, had a band, but he didn't really have any. He's not really in that album period.
Right.
So, we have to give a notoriety to Buddy Holly for one, because he really started that whole I play guitar, I sing, I write the songs. Not many people were doing that until the Beatles. So give Buddy Holly some props. He won't make my list, but uh,
Yeah.
you got to give him an honorable mention. But that's how I'm kind of looking at it like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as far as the last kind of major new music sound that wasn't already a rehashing of other things, I was thinking industrial. I don't know if there was much of that, if anything, to relate back into, say, the 70s, but by the 80s and definitely when it exploded in the 90s. And then,
I
other like, new metal that mixed rap and metal had already existed. And it's not that there's not great albums. I mean, I don't think anyone here is saying there aren't great albums that came post the stuff that we might be talking about here. It's just that of the people that started this, of the people that made those impacts, that's why we tend to talk about it from a certain era. Pete, how do you feel about all this?
Yeah, I mean, and to kind of extend on that, it's really hard to deem anything classic yet that's barely 20 or 30 years old, right? Most, when you look at classic, it's classic for a reason, right? Because it's got 30, 40, 50, 60 years worth of album sales and airplay and all that sort of thing. I remember specifically one of the guys who commented, and I responded to his comment. It's like, nobody cares about these albums anymore. And I'm like, really? It's like there's a reason why some of these albums have sold 5, 10, 15 million copies. There's a reason why they're still played on radio. There's a reason why major advertisers are choosing these songs to play in their ads because people love and cherish this stuff. This stuff will never go away. This stuff will always be looked at as classic. And quite frankly, let's remember, album. How many people nowadays really care all that much about the album anymore? People like us do because we
Right.
grew up with album. It's a work, right? It's a collection of songs put together, meant to be listened to start to finish by the creators. But there's so many people today, they're not interested in albums. Oh, I heard that song. I like that song. I'll grab that song. I'll stream that song. It's all about songs. It's not about records anymore. It's not about albums anymore.
It's kind
So
of gone
these
back to the 50s
Yeah,
where all
right.
we cared
Yeah, yeah,
about were
yeah.
the
Yeah.
45s.
right. Everything up until about like 66, 67, everything was all about the single. So, of course, when you're talking classic albums, you're going to look at stuff from like 1967 to 1990 or in the mid 90s, right? Because that is the bread and butter of the album years, the album decades. So, I think that these albums that we're going to talk about today, and there's a ton more that we won't even talk about. And granted, I'm still a big album guy. I buy lots of albums, CDs, whatever, buy newer bands, classic bands to this day. To me, the album, the art of creating the album is still very, very important. But I see people all the time on Sea of Tranquility in the comments who are like, yeah, I don't buy CDs anymore. I just go and I stream. And if I like a song, I'll whatever, or I'll go and I'll download stuff. And, that's fine. But that's never been me.
Mhm.
So 10 or 20 years from now, we may be talking about albums from the 90s and the 2000s that might, at that point, we can look at as classics. But in 2025, for me, when I'm asked to go pick out 5 albums that every rock fan should own in their collection, maybe you're a young person whose parents listen to this stuff and you're deciding to get into it or whatnot, I'm going to give you stuff from when I was forming my own decisions, when I was falling in love with albums, because I think that these albums are still relevant today and they will always be relevant. That's why now some of these are 50, 60, 40 years old. People still talk about them. People still listen to them. They're still being played. They're still being sold. There's a reason for that, folks.
Absolutely. And I think that a reminder, I mean, we think that this is all totally apparent, but this is just our opinions, right? A lot of people chime in on this stuff and say, you know, why only that? As you pointed out, we're going to talk about stuff that we love. And if it's nostalgic, it's going to come from our growing up. All of us here, different age, some of us different, generations even. And so, I've talked about it. People on my channel know it. I'm a child of the 80s. I love the 80s. So lots of my stuff falls in there. It's not that there aren't great albums from the 70s and the 60s, but if I don't talk about them, it's not that it's not great. It just happens to be the stuff that I love. It's where I come from in all of this. So let's dive into it. Let's go ahead and start talking about some of these. Phil, I'm going to let you kick off here with the first album that you think all rock fans should own in their music collections.
I wonder if my first choice is the first Van Halen album from 1978.
Yeah,
and look at that, just as I expected.
Right.
I
had it in my hand, but I knew someone was going to pick it. I'm like, I'll let the other guy go for it.
Right.
Culturally, I think it's like a thermonuclear musical bomb that went off in 1978 when this arrived. I didn't know what it was. One of my friends bought it. They were going to be sporting Black Sabbath. We were curious. I thought it was a folk band. It so wasn't a folk band. But I think that the guitar sound, the track Eruption, we'd always in our minds thought that a guitarist somewhere is going to do a guitar isolated track, but no one knew it was going to sound like that. The Dave Lee Roth, the picture of him on the back cover, the vocals, just the party atmosphere of the album, track after track after track. And I think it's the guitar style of Eddie Van Halen. It was literally an eruption. It's essential.
Yeah.
Had it flipped. There he is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all 4 of us had it within hand. All of the 4 of us have got it within hand's width to be able to get hold of it as well. So it says a lot, doesn't it?
Ooh. I think you can argue about what your favorite Van Halen album is, but I think the one that everybody needs to own first
is this one.
I agree. I almost pulled 1984, but it's for the track Eruption that's on here. It's 1 minute and 42 seconds, but I think with that track, Eddie Van Halen completely redefined rock guitar sound at that moment. And I've always seen Van Halen as the godfathers of glam metal, even though they're not. They're a rock band. They're definitely above all of that sort of thing. But with the glam metal explosion, it was built in big part, I think, upon Eddie Van Halen's guitar sound and stylings.
I mean, how many young guitar players back in the day, when you were a kid, when you heard Eddie play, it was like an alien had landed on the planet.
Yeah.
Every kid was trying to copy those licks. Well, look at how many people Eddie influenced all these other guitar players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he invented that. Everybody was a clone of him.
Yeah, they were. Yeah,
and there's still lots of it. If you go online and you look at the new guitar shredders of today, they all play Van Halen stuff, talk about it, and reference it. It'll never not be talked about. It's one of those albums and one of those ones that's full of so many tracks. I mean, it's basically a greatest hits. That's how many great songs are on it. The cover of You Really Got Me by the Kinks is so turned into a Van Halen song, meaning they really interpreted it in their own style that it is beyond making it more than what it was. And that's very hard to do, to take a classic song by some other artist and yet make it uniquely your own. But Van Halen was kings at that.
It's also the vocals, the backing vocals. It's more to it, and it's also Ted Templeman's production.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he'd been thinking about this since the first Montrose album, I'm sure.
Mhm.
what he wanted in his mind for guitars and drums and things to sound like. But I think it's everything about this. Van Halen were more than just a heavy metal band. They're like the choruses, the vocals, the whole thing, the whole package, the way they look, everything.
Yeah, definitely more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the reason to have this record is because this is where it began. So this is the one you have to have.
Yep.
That's what
Yeah.
makes it important.
Well, on that note, Grant, why don't you tell
All
us
right.
your first pick?
Well,
Build them
I
off
want to
the
I want to throw this out before anyone else picks it because this is the elephant in the room. James Young, City Slicker. I know Pete's probably got this on his list, and I just
I like
wanted
the album, but I didn't pick it. No.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw it out before Phil took it because I know James Young's right on the tip of his tongue.
Absolutely, yeah.
It is a good
Okay.
album, though. I like the one with
There's your
Hendrix.
red herring of the day, folks.
Right.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to start here. This isn't the album I'm picking, but as far as cultural impact, and of course, we have to thank the Beatles for making this all happen. Well, actually, we have to thank Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, because without them, this wouldn't happen.
Right.
So, Meet the Beatles, of course, we had Please Please Me in the UK, but this set the world on fire, at least in the States. And the Beatles were always trying to get here in the United States. This album brought them. Now, you could pick any Beatles album as far as I'm concerned and listed in here because there's not a bad song. There never was a bad record.
Right. I knew
Uh,
we had some Beatles in here today.
okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as for something that never ever happened before on the planet,
Hmm.
you have to go with Pepper as far as taking 4-track technology and creating an album like this when this came out in 1967, every musician was like in awe over it. For one, no one had ever
Yeah.
came up with anything quite like this ever. Who would have thought you could record anything like this on a 4-track? Of course, they put 2 4-track machines together, but it's creative, it's psychedelic, it's everything. Songwriting's great, production, unbelievable. It set the world on fire. This is where the albums began. You have to have Pepper, but you could have any Beatles album as far as I'm concerned. You have to, but I think as far as the Beatles catalog, yeah, you might like the White Album more. You might like Revolver better. You might like Rubber Soul better. But as far as cultural impact, this is the Beatles' crowning achievement. So I think you have to have Pepper. So there you go.
Yeah. And even the album art on it is so impactful. How many times have we seen not only music bands recreate that with their own celebrities and other people in it, but not only is the album, the sound impactful and it broke ground in what they were doing, but then the album art has been a cultural impact across the board as well, which I think is really cool.
Heck, you had Frank Zappa and the Mothers copying it. Of course,
Yeah.
they were kind of making a mockery of it, but still, it was a big deal. And it still is a big deal as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
You
certainly.
always have to have the Beatles in your catalog
That's
or in
right.
your library.
All right, Pete.
So I've been like debating like which albums to pick all week because I do this stuff all the time on my channel. It's always difficult because you feel
Right,
bad about leaving certain albums out. Which ones do you choose and whatnot? So I was at the gym yesterday and I was working out to Billy Squier's "Don't Say No" and thinking to myself, man, what a great album this is.
Mhm.
Everyone should own this album. And then I was like, you know what? I need to rethink like what I'm picking for tomorrow's show on Brendan's channel because like we can all pick Led Zeppelin 4 and all these other things which immediately come to mind. And then I'm thinking, yeah, exactly. And I have it in my stack here too, right? There's the ones that like you expect to pick. And then I was like listening to the Billy Squier album, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should kind of rethink it a little bit and pick some stuff that people would be like, oh yeah, you need to have that one, but maybe they wouldn't be the first choices, right? And you know what? I was thinking maybe I can even pick live albums too, because I normally don't do that when I do these sort of shows, right?
Okay.
So then I started like going through my collection and thinking, everybody should own At the Fillmore East by the Allman Brothers
Yeah.
for lots of reasons. I mean, this is a perfect example of a young band who had released a couple studio albums that weren't necessarily setting the world on fire, although they're great. but were making their name out on the road, and slowly but surely people were taking notice. And then they decided, all right, record labels like, you're not exactly selling tons of records. Why don't we try and capture what you guys are doing on stage, and we'll release a double live album? Kind of risky, right? There weren't many songs on it, and the songs, who at the time in 1970, who's releasing, 20-minute long songs and giant jams and all this kind of stuff? Well, the Allmans did, and people took notice. And I think this, not only is it a important album in the kind of genesis of the great live albums that would come all throughout the 70s, this is also an extremely important album for guitar players who finally saw that you could take a blues framework and incorporate rootsy elements and jazz and hard rock and create this thing that we eventually started calling Southern rock, right? I think culturally very, very important, hugely important to this band because they became enormous after this. And just such an important record for guitar players who are looking to, learn how to play slide and to use blues in maybe a little bit of a different way. And then, you add in the great vocals and the Hammond organ and the dual drums and all this stuff. Such an incredible, important album, I think, and one of the great live albums from the 70s, which we generally look at as the great decade for live albums in general. So yeah, Fillmore East from the Allman Brothers is my first pick.
Great choice.
I'm glad you brought in a live album because certainly in terms of cultural impact and some major albums, there's some live albums that defined bands more than any one studio album. And
100%.
UFO Stranger in the Night is one that comes to mind where when people talk about the best UFO album, they always throw that in there and they almost never pick Obsession or something else from the band, the studio album wise, because sometimes it's that live show that really captures the true essence of a band.
There's a whole bunch of examples where that is the case, right?
Live
So
and Dangerous.
UFO, Live and Dangerous, Foghat Live, Pat Travers Live, Go for What You Know. And we could go, I don't want to name all of them because someone might pick some for this episode, but there's some fantastic live albums from bands in this decade that are definitive, and some of the versions of some of those classic songs on those live albums are the definitive versions of the songs. There's another one right there,
Yeah.
right?
Right, absolutely. And even that one there, having set the sort of bar that all of these other rock bands want to play Budokan. They want to have their live album from Budokan because of Cheap Tricks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
And the Cheap Trick example and the Allman Brothers are very similar because in both cases you had bands that had very good studio albums that came out before but weren't exactly setting the world on fire. It took that live album for people to say, "Oh, I love that." And then they would go back and discover those studio albums. And that's happened more than a few times, but those are two great examples of that.
Yeah, Kiss Alive is another one.
Again, another one.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Peter Frampton.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
I don't think live albums today have the impact that they once did, certainly with the internet, but also the advent of the VHS player originally and then ultimately DVD Blu-ray. So at the time when those live albums came out, and they did capture what couldn't be captured in the studio, or at least was not really being captured in the studio, putting those out, it gave people an opportunity to hear the band live when they couldn't go see them. Today, turn on the internet, you can go see any live show, whether filmed by a fan or professionally done. It's out there, and it seems like the live album just doesn't have the impact or hit as hard as it once did, which I find to be a shame.
Yeah.
Things change. Things change.
The whole industry has changed, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to jump in here with it'll technically, I guess, be my first pick, or second, but this one here was a pick of mine, and I'm glad that got talked about because I do think that is a defining album. But I think this next one here, I'll tell you all the reasons. AC/DC's Back in Black, and I think you could choose almost any AC/DC album, and certainly those that are Bon Scott fans could do Highway to Hell if they want. But this album here, the cultural impact, it has sold 50 million copies around the world. It is the #1 selling hard rock or metal album, however you want to think of this. I think it sits at like #3 of all time albums that have sold. And beyond that, because we're obviously not just sitting here talking about album sales, but in terms of impact, and I think we mentioned it early on, these songs getting picked for movies, for commercials, for all that, AC/DC being one of those bands, but still going to this day and being able to do what they did at the time where Bon Scott passes away, they bring in Brian Johnson. Usually that does not work, bringing in changing members, and they end up having their biggest album come out of it. Top to bottom, it's a classic. Again, another album that I feel like is just basically a greatest hits, and considering that AC/DC doesn't even have a greatest hits album, where are most people going to start? Back in Black, get Highway to Hell, you're going to be golden.
Yep, great pick. Has to be
Yeah,
here.
yeah, great pick. Yeah, culturally here in the UK, that just as soon as it appeared, everyone bought it. I mean, the opening track, "Hell's Bells," is those few seconds as we move into the opening part of that track is just iconic. It just gets you every time, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
And
it's one of those things too where AC/DC, who's now been around, celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, and how many of these songs are still played live in their shows? So for those first albums that rock fans should be going out and getting or having in the collection, I mean, if you're only seeing bands live, even if you're not an albums person, you're a singles person, some of these albums in particular, I think Back in Black is one of those ones that after you've downloaded, their 5 biggest songs off of there, download the rest of them because it's that great. All right, so Phil, let's throw in your next one.
okay, over my one shoulder, you can see the first Doors album. It's not that, but it links into what Grant said. What Grant was talking about the Beatles in 1967 and how without these bands you wouldn't have what came next. And then it leads into what Pete said about the Hammond organ and the Allmans. And then you also mentioned about how some live albums basically defined bands. So my next one is Made in Japan by Deep Purple.
That's why I didn't mention him, Phil, because I was like, I'm not
Knew
going
it
to
was
mention him
coming.
because I think Phil's going to pick it. So
Yeah, because to me, there are 3 Deep Purple albums that every home should have, and it's Burn, Made in Japan, and Come Taste the Band. And I know In Rock was at the beginning, but I just feel that this captures the definitive versions of the Machine Head tracks. It's got, obviously Child in Time from In Rock. And also, as you mentioned, Pete, about the Allman Brothers taking a short song and extending it to the whole side of an album. Purple were doing this obviously a year later with Space Trucking, and I think it defines that. It captures the band at their peak. If you've got the 3-night deluxe version, you know that they were quite a dangerous band in that sometimes it didn't work. They made errors as they weren't quite sure what they were going to do. But I think it just captures the band in full flight. Blackmore has different moments in his career where you might want to focus on, but I think this illustrates the kind of instrumentation, the kind of improvisational aspect of the band, but equally, I mean, it was only released first of all in Japan. They didn't expect it to go any further, but imports meant that everybody wanted it, and I think it really turbocharged their career. They were top album artists in 1973 with this coming out, and Who Do We Think We Are, and Burn was coming out soon after. So Man in Japan, it's a live album, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I did utter it earlier. I didn't mean to steal the thunder of the ultimate announcement of the album, but not surprised, and I would agree. I mean, while Machine Head was big, the live versions of this took that album even further and built upon it. And it's not often that a live album following an already big popular album is as big or maybe more popular. And you often hear the live renditions from Made in Japan over some of the Machine Head tracks.
The Smoke on the Water track, the riff that everyone's probably, if you're our vintage, have heard quite a few times, but if you're new to it, then it is, I feel, the definitive version. But also you have to try and go back to the fact that when you're around that time when I first heard this, I was thinking, what the hell is this track called Strange Kind of Woman? Where's that from? Because it was a single that wasn't on any album, but they took it and gave it literally half a side. So that's It's all sorts
It was
of
on the
things.
album here, but you guys got Demon's Eye. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's very true. Yeah. So yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
All right, cool. So Grant, where are we at
All
now?
right. Well, I was trying to figure out what I'm going to present next because it's very as you look at things, you're going, God, what should I talk about? What the hell should I talk about? All right.
Everything
I've been
go
doing
out
the
the
same thing
window
the
for
whole
Rock
episode. I'm
fan.
staring at this stack and
All
I'm
right.
like,
So I'm going to go.
where
I'm
do I
not
go
talking.
next?
We already know that, I could mention this, but we've kind of talked about live albums. So, okay.
Okay.
But this I would consider, I'm throwing it out there.
That's,
Absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
we're going to go back to 1972 and we're going to talk about an album. All the musicians like this gentleman. He's very creative. He's produced tons of people. He's got that signature producer sound. But he was making his third solo album, which Pete already knows what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
I considered it.
It
I know what you're
To
talking about.
me, this is a 5-star album. It covers all kinds of different musical stylings. The man played everything on it other than on side 4, which there's a studio band, and it's very loose. I gotta go with Todd Rundgren, Something Anything, because this is absolutely brilliant. Now, whether you like other Todd Rundgren albums, maybe you like Wizard, but still, this is a perfect record. The fact that Todd recorded all this by himself, not many people were doing that. Emmett Rhodes, I think, was doing it around this time or before, but not many people were doing everything. But I saw the lights on here. Hello, It's Me's on here. I couldn't have made any difference. Just absolutely. And there he is doing what he does. Great record, great sequencing, the production. James Lowe, who was in the Electric Prunes, engineered it. Todd didn't engineer this, so probably sounds pretty good because he didn't engineer it. I don't think Todd's the greatest engineer in the world, but he does have a certain style. Uh, but it's a 5-star record. I think everybody should have this in their collection because he was doing things a lot of people weren't doing. And this is kind of where the DIY thing came from. So,
Yeah.
Well, and interesting too that how many albums has Todd produced, and so even if you don't know him as an artist, and don't forget like Utopia and stuff like that, but
yeah.
um, I knew his name as a producer long before, and like what he had done with Meatloaf and other artists, and having an album like that in the collection to broaden your horizons and whatever. And so again, I see that as the cultural tie-in, the classicness. It's his name is out there in so many different ways, whether being in a band, solo, production. So I would agree with you 100%. Yeah.
Produced XTC Skylarking, which
Yep.
is absolutely, come on,
Yeah.
stunning. Grand Funk, we're an American band. Took Grand Funk, got him a hit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
So,
true.
lots of band's hits
and
doing
We're an American band's a great Grand Funk album.
Produced that first Meatloaf album, Bad Out of Hell, and played
Yeah, yeah.
guitar on it, right? Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
give Todd some love, ladies and gentlemen. Get that in your collection. There you go.
All right, Pete, what's next for you?
Well, we talked about the first Van Halen album, and if you're going to do that, you also have to talk about Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. I mean, you have to.
Yes.
Have to, because arguably the world's first true, we had Clapton beforehand, we had Beck, but arguably the first true guitar hero completely doing something that nobody else was doing before.
Mm-hmm.
This album never gets old. And again, you talk about how that first Van Halen album is kind of like they're almost like a greatest hits album. Talk about how Back in Black is like a greatest hits album. You go top to bottom on here. Purple Haze, Manic Depression, Hey Joe. I mean, Third Stone from the Sun, Wind Cries Mary, Foxy Lady. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. You can make a case for the next two studio albums being even greater than this. And they certainly go in lots. Yeah, I mean,
Maybe.
Activist and Electric Ladyland are amazing albums for lots of different reasons. I think this is his most kind of like acid rock. This is definitely the heaviest of the three. He's doing lots of amazing psychedelic stuff on the next two albums and using all sorts of stuff in the studio to get cool sounds and things that nobody was doing at the time. But for the raw energy of a guitar player who is like harnessing the blues and heavier rock than anybody was doing at the time, and psychedelia. I mean, this is just off the charts great. And, an amazing power trio who were doing just some incredible stuff in the studio. So yeah, I had to pick this because it's so important on so many levels.
I must say, you listen to Hendrix, and I don't think, even when you listen to that now, and I've heard other people trying to play like Hendrix, let's say Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yeah.
Okay, he can kind of duplicate it. A lot of people can really duplicate Eddie Van Halen, but I don't think you can duplicate Jimi Hendrix. The way he played, the way he used his thumb, just his technique and his sound was so specific. And
Yeah. He was from
phenomenal.
another planet.
Well, you've heard those stories. Clapton saw him play, and Clapton said, "I'm done. I give up," because it was like they'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
I mean, and any of the Hendrix stuff. See, the thing with the Are You Experienced, there's two different, you got the UK version of it, and then you've got the US version. If you do go later on, you get Axis. That's the way Jimmy presented it, or Electric Ladyland, you know what I mean. But, you could include any of those Hendrix albums, Pete, any of them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I toyed with doing like Band of Gypsies. I mean, you could literally pick any of them, and they're just so important. And you can't be someone who's exploring rock music from this era and not have Jimi Hendrix be
No.
part of that initial exploration. You can't do it. Yeah, it has to be. And it's
Amazing.
funny how none of these, because sometimes you listen to music from the 60s and it sounds a little dated. There's just something about it that it's like, oh yeah, that came out in 67 or 68. You listen to Hendrix
Mhm.
and you're like, God, that could have been released, last year. It still sounds so fresh and exciting and invigorating. And that's what timeless music is all about. That's what timeless artists are all about. I mean, Jimmy was just, one of the greats of all time. So, and so important to so much music that came afterwards. Stoner rock, psychedelic music, hard rock and metal, blues. I mean, just, yeah.
Yeah, people are still covering his music.
Oh,
It's
yeah. Yeah.
influencing today. And I think the point that they can continue to release as much of that unreleased Volt style stuff, whether things are stripped away or
And
not.
we still buy it.
Yeah,
When I
absolutely.
hear,
Can't get enough of Jimmy.
yeah, every time I feel like I'm hearing it new for the first time because it's just that good. It has that kind of an impact. So even though it's a slight altered version or whatever it might be of it, there's an entire new feel to it. And again, that's part of where I don't think, people are able to replicate Jimmy's sound. I mean, even when he would do it in the studio, he played different ways on so many different takes of these things. It just shows the wealth of creativeness that he had going on at that time.
It's almost as if the guitar was part of him because I mean
Yeah.
this is before the video age. Whenever you saw any footage of him, it's almost as if his body's kind of moving with the guitar. I mean, his whole showmanship and everything. I mean, there was he wasn't following anybody. He was all
And
his footprints that he
Trailblazer.
was making were completely his own. Not only in the way he played the guitar and his showmanship, everything about it, and the fact
that's
that they're
part of the
still releasing stuff now.
that's a great point, Phil, because he was not following anybody. He was a lot of these records I'm picking, no one followed these people. I mean, they had a lot of followers, but they are trailblazers. They started this.
Yep.
That's why you need them in your collection because this is where it began. But I do want to mention off Electric Lady Link, All Along the Watchtower. Find me a better played guitar solo. Holy crap.
One of
Absolutely
the greatest cover songs of all time.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
The greatest cover song, I'd say, because come on. He really knew how to interpret Dylan.
Yeah.
Show me anybody else that could interpret it better. Maybe the Birds were good at it, but Jimmy was, whew,
Yeah,
man.
maybe we need to do a video on a who did it better type thing because
There you go. Who did it better?
agreement with that like Hendrix's version of All Along the Watchtower it surpasses everybody, and so many bands have covered it, but nobody has made it sound as good as he has.
Right.
Little wing off of here, just the technique and the way he approaches the guitar. He is one with the instrument. Look at the Woodstock footage.
Yeah.
Jimmy is just like he's in another orbit. He's just channeling the guitar. Gotta have it.
So
That gotta
bottom
have
line, everybody go out and buy all of the Hendrix catalog as ones that you must own if you're a rock fan.
Yeah,
I think that's
pretty
the bottom
much.
line statement.
And every live album that they've ever released, because every
Yeah.
one of them is different, because he
That's
never
right.
played a song the same way twice.
That's
Yeah.
true.
That's why my whole bottom shelf is all Hendrix, because it's like I've got everything they release I buy, because it's like whether it was Monterey Pop or Woodstock or at the Fillmore or LA Forum, every live album, every live performance was different than the one that came before it.
He never, you're 100% right. He never played the same thing twice.
Yeah,
It
never.
just flew out of him. God dang. Never be another Jimmy.
All right, I'm going to throw one out here. I'm going to show my true colors. As I mentioned, child of the 80s. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for
okay.
Destruction.
No.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
I'm sorry. Personally, this is a personal thing. Obviously, this
Okay.
comes down to nostalgia, era I grew up in, my age, all that stuff. I think it's the greatest rock and roll record of all time. I'll stand by that till the day I die. Yet I know that all these bands that were thrown out here, greatest rock bands as well. But Guns N' Roses, sleaziest, dirtiest, one of best rock masterpieces, in my opinion, out there. Bands were not singing about that kind of stuff and being that gritty and dirty, at least not from the glam metal movement and all that sort of stuff. Drugs, the seedy, underbelly of the LA lifestyle, like all that sort of stuff. I remember as a kid getting it and hearing it. And he didn't just sing it straight. I mean, there's a lot of sort of beautiful poetic ways that things are said on it, which was very interesting to take something that was as down and dirty as it is, real life gutter style living, and yet lyrically sing about it as beautifully as Axl did on it. And great songs. This is an album I literally have heard every song on the radio at one time or another. They've all been played. That's probably part and parcel to the fact that Guns N' Roses doesn't have many studio albums, and it's as big as it is. It has sold 18 million copies in the US. Up until, I don't know when it happened, Hootie and the Blowfish blew past it at like 23 million copies, but this was the biggest selling debut album for a very long time. It sold 30 million around the world. So again, to me, it's just one of those ones that every rock collection should have this, if nothing else, to represent what came out of the 80s. Grant, I could see that you did not agree with
I hate that record.
with that, so I'm curious.
I'm not gonna. I went into it on the contrarians part before. I don't need to go into it.
You don't need to.
I
All
mean,
right.
yeah, I'm not a fan, but I totally realize why so many people have loved it over the years. And I was a fan at the time when it came out. I just got to a point with that band where I just had enough of them. But interestingly enough, one of my true regrets in life is that when I was going, because I was in college when that album came out, and I was working at the campus radio station. I actually got a copy of that original LP with the original album art, and I actually had it in my collection, and I wound up getting rid of it.
Wow, is that still sealed?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
I have multiple
That's pretty cool.
copies of this.
yeah. I had the original pressing. I was like, oh man.
Oh,
I
dude,
in
I
the
also have 3 copies of their Live Like a Suicide EP.
my God.
I mean, it's
Oh.
culturally in the UK, it was sort of Cinderella, Rat Dokken, all the usual 80s metal stuff, and then Guns N' Roses came along, and Leopard and Bon Jovi and all the rest of them. But when that came along, I mean, it jarred, and I think I struggled with the voice. I think, and that I always have, but I can't not agree the fact of how huge it was and the difference it made.
Well, I think with Guns N' Roses, they were at the right place at the right time
Yeah.
because they filled that Aerosmith void when
Yeah.
we didn't have
100%.
That's true.
Aerosmith. Come on, that's what they did. I never understood Axl Rose's voice. I could never listen to it. I think the band as a band,
Very
the
good.
songs are good,
Yeah.
but give me a different singer. I don't get Axl Rose. I'm sorry. I tried. I don't get it.
Not
I
for
don't get
everyone,
it.
man.
Yeah.
But
They
they're
lost
good
me.
songs, good production. Hey, and if you listen to that record, what's that, 1987?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a 1987 album.
No.
Think about it. I see. I can give it some props. It doesn't sound like, it doesn't have that 1980s dated production. It doesn't have that gated drum sound. It just sounds like a rock and roll record. They filled in that Aerosmith
Mhm.
thing that Aerosmith wasn't doing. So there you go. And it's all about timing with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, they made a big, as Phil, you were pointing out on it, it created a big shift. So
Yeah.
everything up to that point with, Poison, Cinderella, Bon Jovi, as you mentioned, The Pretty Boy, very glossy production, all of that sort of stuff, including Def
Yeah. Yeah.
Leppard. They
Yeah.
shifted things themselves. And it was interesting that these two albums of 1987, though, but I think the Guns N' Roses album, because you saw lots of those bands drop the makeup, drop the teased hair, go back to jeans and leather and that sort of stuff and just rock really to the roots. So I also see this album as a big cultural shift and impact on music, which again makes it an album that I think, everyone should own. But
Yeah, think about it. I don't want to call it hair metal, but
glam
I'm going to
metal.
call it hair metal because people know what I'm talking about.
All right.
It was getting silly, and
Yeah,
we all know it was getting silly.
Yeah.
And it was timing.
it was.
People were going, "Oh, well, this is something normal."
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, it was perfect timing for them. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So I can give them props. Come on.
All right, Phil.
Okay. Well, no one will know this, of course, but I've just decided to change what I was going to show because I'm thinking of this imaginary person that we're suggesting these records to, and I've now felt that maybe they need something a little bit more different. So I'm going to 1976, and I'm going to go to Return to Forever and Romantic Warrior because
Why not?
everyone needs a bit of jazz fusion in their life and in
Absolutely
their
they do,
collection.
Phil. Absolutely they do.
And if they do, then they need this one because this is the one. Everything orbits around this in a way. Stanley Clarke, everything comes from this. And although it's instrumental and album, obviously, there are little earworms in these tracks that just follow you around for the whole of your life. And I know, Pete, you're a huge fan of this
Oh yeah.
album,
Yeah.
but it's
It's
just,
one of the great albums of all time, and it's just
yeah,
a
yeah,
shame that it's got such a niche audience because I think anybody who appreciates great music, whether it be rock or jazz or prog or whatever, I mean, there's elements of everything in
yeah,
that
there
album.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
Because actually, the word that doesn't fit probably so well is anyone listening to this who knows nothing is the word jazz, because that might make them run for the
It's
hills.
not a
But
jazz
it's
album at
not. It's
all.
not a jazz album. It's a rock proggy album
Yeah.
without vocals. That's what it is.
Well, I'm glad you brought this one in because the title itself, and Pete, you suggested this, and thank you, but I liked the wording of this as five albums every rock fan should own, but it is not five rock albums, metal albums, it's whatever you want, right?
Yeah,
It's five albums that rock fans should own. And so going outside, this is stuff that influences no matter what kind of music we're talking about, that's there. So fantastic choice, I think.
well, because I mean, we're talking about rock fans who love really on fire guitar solos and keyboard wizards and
Mhm.
bass solos that where your jaw drops to the floor and drum fills where you think, wow, how did they do that? This album has all of those.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then
Yeah,
some. Yeah.
and then some. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's a masterful production.
yeah,
And the compositions are so expertly put together. And what's really interesting about that album is that Chick Corea, the leader of the band and
yeah,
keyboard player, who's an amazing songwriter, he allowed the rest of the guys in the band, Lenny White, Al DeMille, and Stanley Clarke, all take part into this in the songwriting and bring songs to the recording session. So you've got flavors from everybody, and every song is of such high quality, no matter who wrote it. It's just mind-boggling how good it is. It's one of the, if not the greatest album in the genre of what is called jazz fusion, even though, as Phil stated, it is not a jazz album by any means.
yeah.
Yeah. There are certain fusion classics that when you listen to them today, I'll cite that one. I'll cite Enigmatic Ocean from Jean-Luc Ponty and The Intermounting Flame or Birds of Fire from Mahavishnu Orchestra. They're all labeled as jazz fusion records. They're not jazz albums, folks. They're
No.
not. It's as close to prog rock and rock as you're going to get in something that's labeled as a jazz album.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be checking this one out today. It's new to me. I'm a Jean-Luc Ponty
Uh,
fan, but I definitely want to check this out.
yeah, Romantic Warrior is just start to finish, it's amazing. 10 out of 10 album, 5 out of 5, whatever you want to call
All right, Grant, what's your
All
next?
right. Well, Pete kind of inspired me on something. I'm not picking something like that, but we're talking perfect songwriting, perfect production. Their sequencing's top notch. You might want to thank the Beatles because probably we wouldn't have this album because of it. But how can we, if you're building a rock collection,
Mhm.
you have to have Who's Next. I am
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
You can look at it as a failed concept of some sort because it was the Lifehouse sessions. I think, didn't Pete Townsend put like the Lifehouse sessions out
Yeah.
on a box or something?
Yeah,
Yep,
it did. Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic,
But
yeah.
look, Baba O'Reilly, Bargain, Love Ain't for Keeping, My Wife, Song is Over, Getting in Tune, Going Mobile, Behind Blue Eyes, Won't Get Fooled Again. I don't have to hear Won't Get Fooled again, but you cannot deny that this put the Who on the map, and the Who were unleashed. The amount of power, the way Roger Daltrey sings, it's like he's just unleashed the beast. Uh, the Who were born here, even though this is my favorite Who album, Who Sell Out. And this is a sealed copy, Brendan, sealed 1967 copy. I just want to, But anyway, Who Sell Out? I mean, who's next? Hell, get
Yeah.
Sell Out too. What the hell? Live a little bit.
it.
But this is a failed concept album. The Who, for Sellout, were selling ad spaces for this. Who was doing that at the time?
Nobody.
All the songs are great here. This has got I Can See for Miles on it. Great. Because
But see, the Who were thinking albums when
Yeah.
people were still
Who
on the
were
single track.
thinking
Yeah.
exactly. Even though the Who, when they in the beginning, were pretty much a singles band.
Yeah.
But Townsend, look at Tommy. You could list Tommy on this too.
Good.
Quadrophenia. Those are all albums.
Yeah.
Good point, Pete.
That's why when you listen to the My Generation album, to me, it sounds like a collection of singles that have nothing to do with each other. But starting with that album and everything going forward, the Who were in a different mindset.
Yeah, and like a quick one, Pete's starting to think,
Yeah.
rock opera, started to think
Yeah.
into that album type of framework.
Yeah.
This is a failed concept album, but what's on here is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
You have to
Just
admit, the Who are on another level.
Just think about it. Think of it like as the most amazing sandwich you've ever had in your life, right? An amazing sandwich has to have great bread and all the stuff in the middle has to be even greater. Just think of Tommy, Who's Next, and Quadrophenia back to back to back. That's like the greatest.
There you go. Yeah.
It's the greatest sandwich of all time,
It's
right?
the greatest sandwich of all time.
Yeah.
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 So there you go.
You could prefer one over the other, right? But how many people unless you're Louis Nasser and he's picking the Who by numbers, but talk to any Who fan and what is your favorite Who album? They're going to pick one of those three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Most cases.
Superb, yeah,
Because by
absolutely.
Who by numbers, isn't Townsend famous for saying, I didn't know how to write for the Who anymore.
It was running dry, yes. The well
Running
was
dry.
running
He could write solo material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of great stuff. Even, a lot of people complain about face dances. I love face dances because,
Great album.
you better, you better, you bet. Think about that song. That's not any different than Substitute.
Mhm.
It's in that kind of pop framework. That's a great pop song.
Oh, yeah.
And, Townsend could write just great pop songs. And do yourself a favor. You got to have some Who in your catalog.
Get a bunch of Who.
Get a bunch of Who and a bunch of Hendrix.
That's right.
To be
Yes.
a theme on this show.
Yeah, clearly showing there's more than 5 of these that everyone should have in their collection.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, Pete.
All right, so as I continue to look through my stack here and figuring out what to pick, we're talking about a lot of great concepts and what makes great albums and what makes legendary albums, right? So I was thinking, I've got a show that I'm doing in 2 weeks with Martin Popoff where we're going to be talking about the productions of Ted Templeman. And we've already mentioned one of them, right? The first Van Halen album, and talking about some of our favorites and why. So one of them happens to be in my stack here. And I figured now's a good time as any to start talking about the greatness that is The Captain and Me by the Doobie Brothers.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I have been listening because I just got done reading that Doobie Brothers autobiography by Tom Johnston and Pat Simmons, which is a great book, by the way. And, in it, they talk about a lot of what went on behind the scenes in making some of these records. And they talk to Ted talks about it a lot too. So at the gym this week, I've been listening to a lot of these classic Doobie Brothers albums, on headphones, obviously. And man, some of these productions are just off the charts great. And what makes a band like this, and specifically this album, so good is because there's so much variety on it. It's like if you like blistering hard rock, well, it's got Without You, it's got
Yeah.
Evil Woman, right? It's got China Grove. If you like more of kind of like pop, like rootsy pop stuff, you got Natural Thing, you got Long Train Running, which is kind of funky and hard rocking. If you like more kind of like country rock, you got Dark and Bluesy, Dark Eight Cajun Woman. Clear as the Driven Snow is one of the greatest like progressive folk songs ever written. You got the gorgeous Southside Midnight Lady. You've got Ukaya. You got the title track. I mean, it's just like it's an amazing run of like 35, 40 minutes of all the greatest things that rock music has to offer. And the layering, I don't want to talk too much back because I'm going to talk about it a lot in 2 weeks with Martin, but the way that the production of the acoustic guitars and the electric guitars and all the drums and percussion and the two vocalists and really three because or four because everybody sang backup on this. It's just an amazing album. And we know the hits, right? We love China Grove and Long Train Running, but man, the deep cuts are so good on here. And don't sleep on stuff like South City Midnight Lady and Ukaya, and it's so good. A masterful, masterful album of everything that embodies the Doobie Brothers biker rock, hard rock, country rock, blues rock. I mean, they pop band, they did it all. And if you listen to their entire catalog, they were constantly like kind of changing things. And Tom Johnston leaves, Michael McDonald comes in. The evolution of the Doobies continues. So yeah, The Captain and Me is my pick for number
That's
three.
one of my favorite albums of all time. That is,
It's
and
amazing.
Ted Templeman's probably my
And
favorite
if you
producer.
mention Ted
Yeah,
Templeman, you might want to mention Don Landy because I'm pretty sure he probably engineered that. And they were like hand
yeah,
in hand,
yeah,
like a tag team. And
yeah.
Don Landy is an engineer. Whew, made Van Halen sound like what they did.
Engineered by Don Landy. There you go.
Yeah, they're superb.
It's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah,
Yep.
fantastic album.
Gotta mention Don.
All right. So I think every collection needs this in it, whether you're prog fan, hard rock fan, uh, love the 80s, don't love the 80s, Rush, Moving Pictures.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, they took the prog stylings of the stuff that they were doing earlier on, mixed it in with shorter song structures, made it very accessible, sort of adopted to the times. This is another one of those albums, I think, perfect timing when it came out. Prog was dying off at that point, but they found a way to make it accessible and sound fresh and new. No matter how many times I've heard Tom Sawyer, Limelight, I don't know. I don't get tired of this. And this is such a great album. It's got one of the best all-time instrumentals with YYZ that's on here. I think it's a no-brainer. I think you guys got to have this album in the collection.
I would agree.
yeah, totally agree.
No
Yeah,
argument there.
Perfect
my
album.
favorite Rush album. That is.
And it's great. And I think I've talked about this before. When I was a kid, I bought that as soon as it came out.
Yeah.
And all throughout the 80s, I played side one to death. And I kind of like left side two alone because all the bigger hits and things were on side one. Now, all these years later, I still love listening to Moving Pictures because the Camera Eye and Vital Signs and Witch Hunt are, to me, really, really fresh because I didn't overplay them back in the day. So now I have Moving Pictures that's just as fresh today as it was, 40 some odd years ago because of that. And those are great deep cuts,
Yeah.
where everybody talks about Limelight and Tom Sawyer and Red Barchetta and YYZ or YYZ as Phil would say.
Yeah.
But yeah. But side two is so good and it's so underrated.
It's a perfect
Underrated.
record.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Absolutely. Yeah, we
No
talked
brainer.
included in the last episode. Well, Pete, you talked about almost picking it for one of your perfect tens.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, Phil.
Right, I'm going back for rock for this one, and I just feel that everyone in this imaginary person who's putting together their rock collection, they need to have this, and it's mainly because to me it's like the pinnacle of Ronnie James Dio and Blackmore. It's Rainbow Rising, and I want people to have it for side two. I know there are parts of side one where it kind of isn't as strong as Tara Woman and What Happens on side two, but side two, Stargazer, that track itself. I mean, Ronnie James Dio was good on the first Rainbow album. I saw him Elf on the Burn tour, but his voice, it's been on this, it just goes up to a level where he's seen as one of the best rock vocalists or metal voices of all time. The whole way that Stargazer is put together, with the orchestra at the end and the guitar solo and the instrumentation. If anyone's going to sing about wizards and sound relevant, it works here. Most people it doesn't, but here you believe that wizards walk amongst you. It is absolutely the authoritative point on that. But I think Blackmore's vision on this track, and yes, it draws in that kind of Kashmir feel, but who cares? It just sounds perfect in itself. And then, of course, straight into Light in the Black, which is just incredible piece of speed rock, and the guitar solo and Tony Carey and Cozy Powell's drumming, and just to when I bought this, I remember going into Virgin Records in Birmingham in the UK, and we were all queuing up to buy it. We hadn't heard anything from it. We just read a review in Sound saying the new Rainbow album, it's fantastic. And we just queued up to buy it. We all went home looking at the pictures on the bus. There's no internet. You can't get hold of anyone on the mobile. And when we went out in the pub at night, all anyone talked about was this album. But I just feel that side 2 of this album is just essential for everyone to have in their collection.
If Nigel Tufnell from Spinal Tap were to comment on Rainbow Rising, he'd be like, side 2 of Rainbow Rising goes up to 11.
Yeah,
it does.
It does. I love those days too when you would read a review and based on a review, you'd go buy an album. Or you buy an album based on the album cover, the art, the way that it looked. You flipped it over, you might see the guys like we were talking about with David Lee Roth, and you go, "Oh my God, this is like the pinnacle of cool." It just
there they are.
Looks like they're going to rock, like they're going to be your cup of tea. Rainbow Rising, definitely one of those things where they came into their own. That's my favorite album from Rainbow. I love it too.
And one of the great lineups of all time, even though only for one album, sadly. But it doesn't get much better than those 5 guys together.
Yeah.
Totally. All right, Grant.
All right, are we on 4 or are we on 5? What number are we on? Because I've lost track.
4 technically.
Number 4, technically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I guess I can. Okay. This is going to go. Okay.
Could be a 5-hour episode, really.
God darn it.
Could be.
All right. Well, you got to have some punk rock.
All right.
Why not? Never mind the Bollocks or the Sex Pistols. I'm going to say, well, Martin may disagree. He might agree. I don't know. He likes this record, but he might pick the Clash. I think this is probably the greatest punk rock album of all time. And it's funny, if you think about it, Malcolm McLaren put the Sex Pistols together. They're like the 1970s Monkees. But look, it's a great record. Chris Thomas production. The guitars on here just shine. Oh my God. Johnny Rotten's vocals. I mean, you're talking about Guns N' Roses. Come on. This is down and dirty.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And Guns N' Roses covered their stuff.
Pretty Vacant, Liar, No Feelings. Look at this, screams punk. And if you're going to go into punk, I mean, it's raw, it's aggressive. You feel Johnny Rotten spitting on you. That's all I can say. I'm not saying I want that, but I'm saying I can feel it when I'm listening because there's just so much anger.
Yeah, the visceralness.
It just encapsulates all that. Good songwriting, the only thing they ever did, but there is that soundtrack, Rock and Roll Swindle, but that's just more of like a collection of oddities.
But isn't the guitar sound fantastic? It might be called
fantastic.
Punk, but the guitar sound was one of the best guitar sounds we'd had in rock for a long time.
It was fantastic, aggressive, and he was playing a Les Paul Custom on this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Steve Jones, amazing on that album. I don't know if I was going with a punk album and I wasn't going to pick a Ramones album, I'd probably pick New York Dolls, the debut album. That it's proto-punk. I know it's really before, calling it a punk album, but that's one of those ones that I think, despite it not selling at the time, the cultural impact of who covered it and who of future bands, who became part of future bands, had huge impact. And certainly the Sex Pistols, not saying that one didn't either, but just in terms of reference, I think I'd go New York Dolls.
Well, I remember Martin talking about that record. Remember, He's probably heard this story where when he would see him, there was at a record store and the records just sat there in the bin. No
Mm,
one bought it. It was a failure.
yeah.
I think Martin ended up buying one or something, but I mean, was there much cultural? I think probably New York Dolls got a lot more notoriety later, kind of like Big
Later.
Star. Big
80s.
Star, their albums didn't sell.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I could recommend a Big Star album if we're going that route.
Yeah, the debut.
But a lot of these musicians will go back and play these records and go, "Oh my God, this is incredible." We would never know Big Star if it wasn't for REM going back and promoting it.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who was probably the big, person for New York Dolls, but man,
Yeah, I mean, sadly, like the New York Dolls, the MC5, the
mhm.
Stooges, I mean, they
Yeah.
were not big sellers, but if you
Influence.
don't get the Sex Pistols without those bands.
So I probably should have picked the Stooges. You would not have this
Right.
without the Stooges or the MC5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it all depends.
It all
But I think 1977, no one really cared about the Stooges, but this made a much more of an impact.
Yeah.
I mean, did it really sell here in the States? Phil, this probably did pretty well over in the UK, though,
Oh,
didn't it? Like
it
it
did
did
very well
very
in the
well.
UK. Literally, we got the New Musical Express, which basically everything, as soon as that came out, everything else was dinosaur music and,
Yeah.
and hippies, and just no one listens to that anymore. But actually, bands like the Stooges and that became more popular after that came out, as
Yeah.
everyone started to look back
Yep.
to see where they'd come from.
And the Sex Pistols are a lot more important, not just for the music, but as far as like just a pop movement. I mean, the way you dress, the attitude, right? The type of clubs you go to. I mean, there's a lot more to than just the music with the early punk movement.
Cultural impact, ladies and
Yeah,
gentlemen.
yeah,
But without that, we wouldn't have had the new wave of British heavy metal. But
100%.
Ah,
Yeah.
There you go.
we needed that kind of punk attitude to reboost, the resurgence of metal, really.
and the whole DIY thing too. Punk bands
Yeah,
themselves, right? And
Yep.
that was a big part of the new wave of British heavy metal.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, Pete, number 4.
All right. Well, I've been staring at "We're an American Band" by Grand Funk for a while, but we did already kind of talk about it. So I found another one that I think everyone needs to own. And you could argue that there are other albums by this guy or this band that you could have in your collection and you should have in your collection. But I would say the first one you need to get, Hello, Hooray, Billion Dollar Babies by Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
Classic. I grabbed like 3 Alice Cooper albums and I'm like looking at the track list top and I'm like, all right, well, what would be the best first place for someone to go with Alice Cooper? I always tend to go here. I mean, from the opening track of Hello, again, there's so much on this record. There's pop music on here, there's heavy rock on here, there's kind of creepy, weird gothic stuff on here. It's got a little bit of everything. Raped and Freezing, Elected is such a great song. There's hits on here. Title track, Billion Dollar Babies, Unfinished Sweet is so good. No More Mr. Nice Guy was another enormous hit for him. The Amazing Generation Landslide, so like dramatic and just kind of like, Sick Things, the whole back end, Sick Things and Marianne and I Love the Dead is the quintessential, like creepy gothic, proto metal Alice Cooper. It's got a little bit of everything. Great production by Bob Ezrin, an amazing band in their prime. And to me, you got to have some Alice in your collection. And I would argue this is your best place to go.
I agree 100% on that. I absolutely
Yep.
love that album. I think it's the best one. I mean, a lot of people will mention Killers, which is a great album. I think it was 71. I love Billion Dollar Babies.
A lot of times I will say Killers is my favorite because it's
Yeah.
amazing. But this is like you can't argue this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think if you're
totally.
going straight Alice solo, not Alice Cooper band, then it's probably Welcome to My Nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my favorite. With Billion Dollar Babies would be second place. Yeah,
And Love It to Death is amazing too. That's also one of his
yeah,
great
it's
early
a good.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've been wearing this shirt the whole time in the
Uh-oh.
For a
video.
reason.
I can't believe nobody has mentioned a Pink Floyd album. And even though it's not my favorite of them, I think every collection needs Dark Side of the Moon. The mix by Alan Parsons.
We all have it. There
Oh,
you go.
there you go. So
Oh,
everybody
it's-
pulled it out. It is that kind of album. I'm going to let others hold it up. Right. Iconic artwork on this. I mean, that in and of itself, the fact that it has spent it's 990 some weeks right now currently on the Billboard Album 200 charts. right? That's insane that 1973, this thing comes out 52 years later going on. It is still selling so much that it can rival brand new releases that are coming out from other artists. Sales on it, 15 million copies just in the US, 45 million around the world. Aside from all of that, it's got the amazing songs Money, Time, Us and Them. While I don't like it, I know everybody loves Great Gig in the Sky. That is one of those ones that I've got a version of it from the Immersion box set where it's before the gospel vocals were added to it. And I think it's far superior, but that's just me. But this album, as an introduction to Pink Floyd and a nice, succinct thing, something that's not so sprawling as like The Wall, I think this is a great place to start. And it's going to be one of those ones that kids grow up. Yeah, and you get the stickers and the poster and the original version of this thing. I mean, that whole thing
You'll get them, yeah.
is really cool. But you got to have some Floyd, and you should probably start with this one here. And then there's a lot of great ones, like Animals happens to be my favorite of the Roger Waters era. Would definitely suggest that. So clearly,
I prefer Animals and Wish You Were Here, but Dark Side of the Moon is like, that's mandatory.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I mean, as an album, and the fact that it was on the charts so long, and the production, it's perfect record.
Yeah.
Some people may go on, well, no Syd Barrett, no Pink Floyd. Piper's a great album too, but
this
just seemed like the gods were shining down on it.
This changed everything again. Another one of those albums that really not only defined that era, but also had an impact the way bands are recording. And Floyd's one of those bands, still to this day, I don't think anyone sounds like them. Nobody can replicate David Gilmour's playing. It's one of those guys that stands out.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, Phil, number 5.
Okay. Thought about this because it was going to be Quadrophenia, but we've already touched on the Who, so I've quickly gone somewhere else. But I think that our rock fan needs to have some Led Zeppelin. I couldn't not do Physical Graffiti. It could have been 4. The album I play the most is the first Led Zeppelin album because of the cultural impact it had and how different it was. But I feel that this one and the impact this had, releasing a double album with such a wide range of material with so many different textures and flavors and personalities of the band all poured into one double album, it has to be this one. I think this comes at the top of lots of people's lists of the all-time rock album. And it isn't an album where I like every track all the time, but over the years some have come in and out of favor with me. It has Kashmir on it, of course, which is probably top of the Zeppelin mountain for many people. It is for me. Custard Pie, Wonton Song, there's some great stuff, and some of the acoustic stuff, the ballads in the light, the cover design, it's unique. It was recorded over bits and pieces. It also contains my favorite Led Zeppelin song, which I think is The Rover. So I think everyone should have this.
I agree completely. I almost grabbed that as one of them. I only grabbed this because, again, of the cultural impact. Stairway to Heaven, that's number 1 song on every countdown ever, it seems like, or it's competing with Hotel California, that sort of a thing. But in terms of my favorite album, Physical Graffiti, I'd go with that hands down every day of the week. And the fact that it's made up of songs from the earlier album sessions that they then finished off for this, didn't quite have enough, so they add in some other stuff to make this a double album. It's really, throwaway tracks on a double album is amazing at the quality that they are for having been throwaway tracks that didn't make other albums. So we talked about albums that are greatest hits. I mean, this is a selection of stuff over a period of time from other album sessions put together that then put out some of the stuff like Kashmir. That is a quintessential Led Zeppelin song.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
And the fact that these are all from different sessions, but once they were compiled together, they were able to make it sound like a cohesive record. It's like all these songs belong together.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
So that really says something right there. Plus, it talks about the quality of the songwriting. And if these were rejects and they didn't make the other albums,
right.
Led Zeppelin was just on fire,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
heard lots of people say that there's tons of filler on Physical Graffiti. I never thought that at all.
I've
I think
never
to
thought that
me, it's the
either.
greatest, arguably the greatest double album of all time, and to me, it's the greatest deep cut album ever released, ever.
Totally. Got to have some Led Zeppelin in the collection,
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah,
what it is.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Go
Yeah.
buy all that too. All right, Grant, what do you got?
All right. Well, you know, everybody, when you get down to the end of this thing, everybody's had so many great picks. I'm running out of stuff. I brought a whole bunch of stuff, but then I'm looking through, God, what am I going to present next?
Yeah.
Well, I've already presented
Right.
this once, but I don't care. Who cares? You need this record. You need a representation of this band. And I think I'm probably going to get crap because people gave me crap about it before. I think you have to have Queen Night at the Opera
You
in your
do.
damn collection.
You do.
Where's the game?
You do, yeah, you do, yeah.
You've got to have it.
Yeah.
It's a perfect record. You get all different styles. You've got, come on, Bohemian Rhapsody's on it, whether you need to hear it or not. It was a phenomenal track. The production, Roy Thomas Baker, is incredible. I can't believe this record sounds as good as it does, considering all the overdubs. And considering the technology at a time, what was this? A 16 track, 20? What was this? Do we know? 16, 24? 24 might be a little late.
Yeah, might be.
The fact that we could do all these overdubs of guitar parts. I mean, you couldn't have done this record had we not done Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But this as a engineering marvel, Roy Thomas Baker needs an award because I don't think they were ever quite as ambitious like they were on this record. They threw in the kitchen sink. Now, you may like Sheer Heart Attack better. You may like the debut better. But I have to believe that this is the peak album in the Queen catalog. Everything's here. I love everything about it. I don't care what you say in the comments. I
still got to throw my
love it.
Throw my love out for the game, which I know you don't like. And then
I don't. Okay, I
nice
like
little
the
war going
game,
on in the
but
comments
that's
last
where the cracks started to form.
week.
There's great stuff on the game. It's no Night at the Opera.
Yeah, I know. But
It's a pop record.
You got to have some Queen. And even if you don't look at it as Queen, it's like you got to have Freddie Mercury. You have to have that in there. Freddie Mercury is somebody that, you know, his vocal styling, nobody sounded like him.
Still don't.
And no one sounded like Brian May.
No,
Not even Roger Taylor.
Still to this day, nobody sounds like Brian May.
Nobody.
It's that custom built guitar that he made back when he was a
Gotta be.
dad.
Running
Playing
through
with
those
what's the
AC30s.
coin that he uses, Phil? Where he uses like a little
sixpence. Yeah.
sixpence. Yeah, that's it.
But I think if you took Brian May and threw him through anything, he would sound like Brian May.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time he guests on somebody else's song, he still sounds like Brian May. It still sounds like all of a sudden there's a Queen solo in the middle of a song where the band doesn't sound anything like that. And it's like, oh, well, there's Brian May, but it just stands out like a sore thumb because you expect to only hear that embedded in Queen music.
Queen, yeah.
Yeah, you know, they all say all the great guitar players. Now, you know, I don't know if I've talked about it, but you know, the really great players, maybe some of them aren't technically incredible like Ace Frehley. Yeah. Ace Frehley plays a guitar solo, you go, oh, that's Ace Frehley.
That's Ace, yeah.
All the great players have a distinct tonality, and then Brian May's right at the top.
Oh, yeah.
There's no one more distinct, you know, man. Well, he and Jimmy, very distinct.
And Ace is not, like you said, he's not a technically proficient player. He's not even anything, in my opinion, as a great guitarist. But the crazy thing is, right, immediately recognizable.
Yeah.
And the licks that he does play on there are amazing. I mean, they fit so perfectly, even though he's not shredding all over the board or doing something.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the amount of people that were musicians, and I should say, influence that talk about this all the time, that are huge Kiss fans, but huge Ace Frehley fans. Anthrax will talk about it all the time. Pantera guys would talk about it all the time. And their music doesn't sound anything like that. What's crazy is how Kiss, and Ace Frehley in particular, could inspire those guys to go off and do something where their music is entirely different, but you know, they will talk about it all the time. They picked up guitars based on Ace Frehley.
Based on Ace, yeah.
Very influential. There we went on a Kiss rant.
I I know, and
Yeah.
I was waiting to see if a Kiss album would appear in here, but so far not.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think some of that needs to be included, but
Yeah, there's no Sabbath yet either.
yeah, that's right. There's
Oh,
no Sabbath yet.
well, I would have, but
No, I'm
we
waiting.
never got there. I thought you guys would have picked Sabbath.
Yeah,
I thought about it, but
Yeah,
I left
I've
it
got
out
one on
to
my
guys
list.
All
like
right,
you
so
go with
I
it.
think just to go on I think if you're going to pick a Sabbath album, I think of all of them, you've got to start out with Paranoid.
oh, you have to.
Whether you
Yeah.
like something else, I think if you're going to build your collection, it's got to be that record and
I
then
agree.
branch off from there.
Yeah.
Well,
There you go.
Oh, look at you. Look at you showing off again.
Still with the dark horse pick there. I saw that.
Show that to Phil. Show that
Sabbath
again. I
20
missed it.
Sabbath comes.
Oh, see, you
That's a
could
good
even
one.
get that, but you know,
Yeah.
Okay,
you
Pete.
gotta have it. Gotta have it in your
All
collection.
right.
Surprise.
So I'm going to go with a couple. Well, humor me here for a minute or two, folks. Folks are expecting me to talk about the first Boston album.
Yeah,
Yeah, it deserves to
What?
be in this conversation, but
Yeah.
I've talked about it enough. I'm not going to talk about
Your
it.
JY
Folks are-
City Slicker?
Well, honestly, folks are probably expecting me to talk about the Grand Illusion.
Yes.
I love Grand
And yes,
Illusion.
you need
I
it,
thought
but I'm
we
not
would
going
get
to talk
some
about
picks.
Oh, damn it.
that. Pronounce Leonard Skinner, you need it, but I'm not going to
Yes.
talk about it. I'm
All
not
right.
even going to talk about Sticky Fingers right now.
Yeah.
Such a
I'm not even
tease.
going to talk about the Crime of the Century by
It's
Supertramp.
a
But
great
what I am
record.
going to talk about
clever.
is the Royal Scam by Steely Dan.
Ah,
I wasn't expecting that.
I
yeah.
wasn't expecting.
I
Well, I know
wanted to,
you
I wanted
like
to do
it.
something that people weren't expecting. You could say that Asia is the greatest and most accessible Steely Dan album ever released. I don't think I would argue that. However, my personal favorite for a rock audience, someone who's into rock music, you got to go with the Royal Scam. I mean, again, this band, pop, funk, jazz, rock, all blended together into this thing that nobody can categorize, but it's just Steely Dan, right? Kid Charlemagne's on here. You got the Caves of Altamira. You got the awesome Don't Take Me Alive, Sign and Stranger. I mean, every turn on this album are these amazing kind of lyrical and quirky things going on. The Fez, it's like the dumbest song on the face of the earth, but you know what? It's so catchy. It's so amazing. Green Earrings, Haitian Divorce, everything you did, and then the wonderful, haunting title track, The Royal Scam, finishes it up. To me, this is a 5 out of 5 star classic, start to finish. It's got amazing guitar playing. Larry Carlton and everybody else working on this album, so good. That unmistakable vocal style of Donald Fagen, and just the way they incorporated all these cool jazz cats who come in for the sessions and create this blend of music that, again, you can't really classify. Just amazing. The album cover is amazing. You need the Royal Scan, folks. That's it.
All right. Well, ultimately, my five were already covered because Van Halen, you picked Phil first, and then I showed the others. So all five of mine. So I'm going to kind of do what you did, Pete, here. No, I'm not going to talk about Jay Young. Jay Young.
You're not picking James Young City Slicker?
Yeah,
No,
next episode.
no. But I'm going to show two that I think should be part of the collections, although they're definitely not my favorite from these artists. But Fleetwood Mac, Rumored,
100%. Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
in there. I'm again, child of the 80s. I love Tango in the Night. I would hands down go with that over that album, although Rumors being the classic. Eagles, Hotel California,
Yep.
and kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But personally, I like One of These Nights as my favorite.
I would agree on that. One of these nights is terrific. Yep.
All right. So the last one, and I had pulled 13, and so now 12 of mine have been shown. I'm going to show this one here, Journey Escape.
Yeah.
Phenomenal guitar. We could go back and pick something from Santana with Neil Schon in it too, I think, and have it in here, or anything from Santana. But this album here, I think, is quintessential Journey, but it's also quintessential AOR melodic rock style. If any band does it the best, in my opinion, it's Journey. Styx being more in the punk rock area of that, but same sort of thing. They fit into that. But Don't Stop Believin' is on here. Stone in Love, Who's Crying Now? Those are the first three opening tracks that are on this. Mother, Father, Open Arms, the amazing ballad that closes this thing. 1981. I think it's a fantastic album. You got to have some Journey in the collection.
Yeah, I love the title track. Again, the production, the guitar sound, everything about it. It's just
I would, if I was going to pick one, I'd probably go with Infinity because I love me some Greg Raleigh and I
That's
love
my
that
favorite.
RTB
Yeah, that's
production.
my favorite. Yeah,
There is some killer guitar playing on Infinity.
yeah,
It'll just tear your face off.
yeah.
Oh my God. There's great
Infinity is
guitar playing
great.
on this too, but
Oh yeah, well, all these. I mean, Neil Schon is one of the most original and underrated guitar players on the planet. I've been saying that for years. I think Infinity works so well for me because it's the first album with Steve Perry, and it's bridging the gap between that early proggy fusion stuff they were doing when they formed the band after Greg and Neil left Santana, and is the best bridge to everything that came afterwards. But I would agree, Escape or even Frontiers are just quintessential '80s melodic rock albums that you absolutely need. They're both just so amazing.
and
So
Pete, you know you are going to agree with me, but I love it when Steve Perry and Greg trade off vocals.
yeah,
Oh,
that's the secret sauce. They were, yeah, I mean, I
so
get
good.
what Jonathan Cain brought to the band from a songwriting perspective, but I always miss that dual vocal attack between Steve and Greg. There was nothing like that on those
Nothing
couple albums.
like it.
Nothing
Love it.
like it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Greg Raleigh,
Yeah.
amazing singer
Amazing.
and keyboard player.
Another underrated musician for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, we could probably do this all day long here, doing 5 albums every rock fan should own, but this really turned out to be more like 20, 30, 40 rock albums because I know I covered 13. I don't know, yeah, if you guys covered
Yeah,
everything else
there's
that you
loads. Yeah,
recall,
yeah.
show your last remaining ones that you want in here because there's just so many good ones. We
Yeah,
could
there's
do a
tons.
top
Yeah.
50, top 100, whatever. But I want to go around the room here and let each of you guys just talk a little bit about what's coming up on your channel. So, Pete, what do you have coming up down this next week?
Let's see. So the next it's
Monday.
the end of the month. We got coming up. When is this airing, Brendan?
Monday.
Monday. All right. Well, go back and watch Talking Jazz on the channel that aired over the weekend. We've got the review crew that aired over the weekend with Jamie Laszlo and George Lemay and I ranked the albums of 80s U.S. metal band Apocrypha. We've got coming up the Monsters Den this week. It's our show that we do all about films, normally about horror and monster movies, but we're doing our favorite westerns this week. So that's coming up this week on the channel. And then UK Connection is next week, is over the weekend, and ranking the albums with Grant of Loggins and Messina. So that's coming up this week. So that's in a nutshell what's happening on Sea of Tranquility.
There you go.
Any love for Open Range? The as a western, do you like that movie or know of it?
Open Range?
Open Range with Kevin Costner and
God.
I forget the other gentleman. If you've never checked it out, you
I don't
like
think I've seen it.
westerns. Open Range. Check
I'm
it
What
looking-
year
I've
was
never
that?
seen it. Yeah.
out. Early 2000s, I think. It's
Okay.
Annette Bening is part of it. The other older gentleman is another real classic. It's got a lot of classic actors in it, but I think it has the best gun shootout scene of any movie I've ever seen.
Wow. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, I love it.
Cool.
All right, so Phil, now spinning. What's going on your channel?
Last Money Magazine, we've got the review show, Meet the Collector podcast, and also I'm doing a top 20 US guitarists and top 20 UK guitarists ranking, and also a Kiss special as well.
Fantastic. All right, and Grant?
I'm working on, we recorded our top 5. I had to put a panel together. God, every night this week I did a live show and I'm about ready to die.
Go on
But
another
I
cruise,
did
buddy. Go
record.
on another cruise and get even more backed up. Go ahead.
That's right.
Yeah, I know. I overdid it. God, I just want to go to bed. We recorded a top 5 Sweet album show that I'm going to be working on today to get up, which was a fun discussion. We
Yeah.
got some new blood in the channel, giving them a trial run, see how that goes. And then I do know that Brendan and I are doing something. What are we doing, Brendan?
We did something with rare and obscure albums. You and I are gonna try to film that maybe next week, and it'll post the following week, so you guys can keep an eye out for that. But you guys, if you tuned into the last video that we did on here, which was Perfect 10 Albums, and I will leave a link in the description. Grant loves to get off on tangents of rare, obscure albums, and the rest of us also have plenty of them. But I thought this would make for a great new show to let Grant go off onto those tangents and do that. And I love finding those and digging those albums. Yeah, the ones that were never pressed to CD, only ever on vinyl for some reason. Maybe they made one album, but it's so freaking good, right? So we're going to be doing that. So yeah, that's going to be popping up on my channel here in a week or two. I'll give you guys some updates on that. But I just posted the new LA Guns Leopard Skin album review. Got that in early. It's coming out on the April 4th. Going to do an LA Guns album ranking, and I'm going to include all the different variant lineups. So it's 23 albums if you count all the different versions of the band. I'm going to do that. But that's all to tie in with an interview I'm doing with Tracy Guns, the guitar player of the band. That'll be posting on Thursday. So keep an eye out for that. All right. So that wraps this up here. Hope you guys found some fantastic albums in here that we all think are amazing ones that every music collection should have. And I know a few little obscure ones were also thrown out and mentioned in here too, for those of you that already own all of this great stuff. All right, but for Phil, Grant, Pete, I'm Brendan. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
Oh, cause the balloons to go off.